I have to reduce it from my computer, I guess.
Oh, okay. Hey, um, guys, welcome. This is Sambaza Show Live. We're not cutting anything. We're going straight. Today we have Nosa Iyare, and he is the host of the Culture Podcast, Culture Class Podcast. I got that
Get
right,
it
right?
right. Get it right, bro.
Okay.
If not, I'm
First
going to
time.
call you Steven instead of Sambaza.
Say Sambaza. Sambaza is the guy who's here right now. So, we're gonna talk about a lot of things. But mainly, let's start off with this collective that we are. By the way, this is our first show with Sambaza Live. It's raw. We're not cutting off anything. Everything that goes here is just going to be as is, and then we just post it. So,
Damn, you put me on the spot, man. Why you put me to test out the live show first, man? I mean, I might do a Will Smith up in here and do something virtually.
gotta have somebody coming out there first. So, we're gonna look into there's this thing coming out. It's the pod breakers, right? I
Pod
have the
break, yeah.
opportunity
Mm.
of joining Nosa, and we're a collective of podcasters that are going to be out sometime in July, the fourth weekend, and I think we're going to do some good stuff. As in, the podcast is going to come together and hang out and like we're in this cube and then okay. This is okay. Let me go say this right. We're in this cube in this house and we're gonna hang out together, and on top of that we're gonna create some content all weekend, so it's like a conference. So
Facts. It's
Nosa's
cool,
gonna
much
give us
cooler than a conference.
right. So Nosa, you're gonna let us know what this thing is gonna be all about. Maybe start with a little bit of history and then we'll go into what it's gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of history. I mean, so my name is Nosa Iyare. Shout out to you for getting my last name correctly, though. Like, I typically have to correct people there, but you got it. I guess, we're kindred spirits in that way, African brothers. Um, but yeah, I host this podcast called the Culture Class Podcast. And I've been doing that since 2018. I started that in grad school, and what I do on the podcast is to talk to people from different cultures. I've been opportune to talk to people from about 52 or 53 different countries. Last year, I clocked 3 years hosting Culture Class in November. And, I had this whole run in to my 3 year anniversary, 150 episodes, all that stuff. During my journey, I had met a lot of people, not just interesting guests for my show, but I had met fellow podcasters. So I had been on one or two other podcasts. I had been to podcast events, virtually and in person. I just immersed myself in the whole podcasting community, like globally, right? And so one thing I had always wanted to do for my podcast was like a live show slash tour. And I'm giving you guys a background of how PodBreak it kind of like came out to be, right? So last year I was having this reflection that, hey, the podcast is 3 years old. I've done a whole bunch of things. What else can I do? So I was trying to see if I could put together like a show for my podcast personally. But unfortunately, like when I looked at the logistics, it was going to be way too expensive for a little old show like mine. So I decided to reach out to a fellow podcast friends and say, hey, do you know what? Would it make sense for us to do like a mini tour together or something like that? And we just kicked around the idea like over December, during Christmas and all that. And eventually, the more and more podcasters came on board, we decided that, hey, instead of doing like a show or a tour, let's make it one event. So think of Pod Break, which is the name we chose, like podcast break, like spring break, combining podcast and spring break or summer break. And let's have it in the house, right? So think of it like, I don't want to say a reality show, but think of it like a podcast picnic of some sort. So we're a group of 15 different platforms. Last I checked, more people are coming on, all African, or mostly African, all black, definitely. And we're going to be converging in Chicago. And hopefully before then, we're going to have a lot more podcasters come on board. But what we're going to do in Pod Break is just to, the main idea is to come together in one house, produce content together, help each other be better, have fun, and just take a break from even though we're going to be producing content, we're going to take a break from producing content in the usual way and spice it up a little. And Sambaza is one of the podcasts that are going to be represented on Chicago. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. So it's only African podcasters that we're working with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm so stoked and excited about this because it's my first time actually to be in a conference and where we're sitting as African podcasters just to chill. And I am really, really honored for you to have actually chosen me to come and hang out with you. So hey, shout outs to you and your people.
Hey, you came highly recommended, man. Like I think it was Raf that reached out to me, and he said, he had been, in touch with you on Clubhouse, and obviously you're always on those stages on Clubhouse, representing the continent in a positive manner, using your platform, using your podcast. And when I eventually listened to your episodes, it was like one of the best produced podcasts I've seen independently. Like you can be up there with like the NPRs with the production quality, and it's just a handful of people on your team. So I knew that you'll bring a value to the group, and that's kind of like why I reached out. But it's not a conference though. Like when you say conference, like a lot of people picture us being in the banquet hall in like a hotel, we with suits on stage and stuff. It's a very chill. Think of it like a creator house type of thing, but we're all podcasters. We're literally like renting out an Airbnb. Uh, in Chicago, like a 12-room Airbnb or whatever, and we're just gonna be there chilling, like producing content, having fun, maybe having some listeners over, that type of thing. So that's what it's gonna be.
Oh, okay. That sounds very, very nice. I'm like I said, I really want to be there, and I'm gonna be there. And I think we can do some good things as African podcasters. So I'm gonna dive into how, if you have anything to talk about it before we jump into your podcast, the Culture Class podcast, because I think I'm gonna be a student of yours, considering that you have 150 plus episodes. By the way, we're only this is gonna be featuring podcasters, African podcasters, and they'll come into the show and we'll just talk to them and give us a brief synopsis of what their podcast is all about and try to push what their agenda is. And hey, who knows, we can create this big great community out there. So anything about the podcast, the
Pod break.
meeting, the pod break group meeting that we're going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is, if you're a listener of the Sambaza podcast, listening to this right now, if you're going to be in Chicago, July 1st to 4th, so literally the 4th of July weekend, right? We have some podcasters coming in from Canada as well. If you're going to be in Chicago, just click the link in the show notes and drop us your name and email, and we're going to be reaching out to you if you're a listener. And if you are a fellow African podcaster and you want to be a pod breaker, you want to join the group, you want to participate in this thing, also go to our website is podbreak.org. That's POD and break. .org, and send us a message and we'll add you to the WhatsApp group.
Okay, that's what's up. So that's all we're going to be talking about. And I want to reintroduce Nosa Iyare, the host of Culture Class Podcast. Let's start off there. When did you
That's,
start podcasting? What got you to podcast?
when did I start culture class?
Yeah.
So my first episode was published December 1st, 2018, but it was a whole year leading up to publishing that first episode, right? So I came to the US in 2017. I came for grad school. I went to school in DC. Backstory is my dad was in the military in Nigeria, and being in the military, we got to travel to a whole bunch of places. We have 36 different states in the country of Nigeria, and I got to live in about 25 to 27 of those states, something like that, just by the sheer fact of my dad being in the military. So I really got accustomed to interacting with different cultures within the country of Nigeria. I had done a bit of traveling as well. So when I eventually moved to DC, DC is a very multicultural city in a sense. It is chocolate city, but there are people from all over the world because you have the World Bank there, you have the IFC, you have all this. It's obviously it's the center of government. So all these different cultures. And I went to American University, which is also it's predominantly white, but it has a mix of cultures here and there. So I've always been interested in culture. I've always loved traveling. I've always loved, learning about people different from myself. So At first, the podcast was going to be me as an African immigrant just talking about my experiences. And that's kind of like what the podcast started off as. I had a co host at the time, and we did the first few episodes together. But it quickly morphed into not my experiences, but the experience of other people, like people from Saudi Arabia, from Kenya, from Tanzania, from South Africa, all these countries, and me learning about their culture and my listeners doing the same through our conversation.
Okay, you started off with a host, and your host was Tangwa Aka or Aka. Did I say that
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
Tongwa Aka. In fact, she's still guest hosting. So, fun fact: this is the first podcast recording. I was just telling Sambaza before he hit record. This was my first recording this year, right? So when I clocked 3 years at the end of last year, I was gonna put the podcast in hiatus till the summer, like go off. Like I've been doing it consistently for 3 years, 150 episodes, no week skipped. So I was gonna take a little break. But I reached out to Tongwa, we did the first 9 episodes together, and I reached out to her and I was like, "Look, I'm gonna take a little break. You've been off the podcast for 2.5 years. Do you mind coming back and guest hosting while I'm away?" And she was like, "Yeah." Like she's been doing a great job at guest hosting the last 3 or 4 months while I've been away. But yes, we did start the podcast together because she was in the School of Communication. Remember, I said I started this in American University in Washington, D.C. I was in the business school. She was in the School of Communication, and we both had the same campus job. We worked at the same campus job. So when I got talking to her, she said she was in the School of Communication, and I knew that the School of Communication had a studio. At the
Okay.
time, I was too broke to buy any type of equipment. My laptop was shitty. I couldn't afford mics, nothing. I was a broke graduate student. So when I reached out to her, she was like, "Oh, yeah, she had a key to get into the studio." So we'll go to SOC, which is a School of Communication after hours. And that's how we recorded our first like 8 or 9 episodes or something. Yeah.
Because the quality, I went to listen to it, and the quality was really, really good starting off. And did you guys have any fears when you were starting off the podcast? Because most of the podcasters have that fear of starting up the podcast and going to where they are. And what kind of music, your theme music, where did it come from?
My theme music, it came from, let me answer that question first. So, I knew a producer through a mutual friend of mine back in Nigeria. And, I just told him that, hey, I was starting a podcast that, can he connect me with he's a video director back in Nigeria. Shout out to you, 42 Media. And, he just reached out to one of his friends who's a music producer, and he provided the theme music. Fun fact, I got that theme music for free, but I ended up sending him some money like 2 years later just to thank him. Like, hey, man, like you did this music like 2 years ago. I know I didn't pay you at the time, but I just want to appreciate you for doing this because I didn't have money. Like I said, I was a broke graduate student when I started. As far as fears go, of course, like everything in the book, right? I said, I was supposed to start the podcast a year before I started, right? So, the initial co-hosts I was supposed to start the podcast with two young ladies who are also students of American University. Because I had stalled and procrastinated so long, a whole year, they ended up graduating. Right,
Mm.
and leaving the school, so I was left alone. I was like, man, like I'm going to graduate in a year because graduate degree is just 2 years. I have to start this now. So obviously there was a fear of uncertainty, like, oh, how can this be as good as the Joe Rogan podcast on day one? I don't know how to edit. I don't even know whatever this is, personal information. Like there were a lot of fears, but I always I try to learn to push through and just going for it. And so far so good. Here we are.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to put you to task. When you and Nosa were on episode 2,
Me
you
and
talked
who?
about,
Me and Tongwa.
is it Aka? Yeah, Tongwa. You and
Tongwa
Tongwa.
Aka, yeah.
Yeah, Aka, Tongwa Aka. You're on episode
Or
2, and then you say
Akanji. Her
something
name is
about
actually
the podcast.
Akanji. Her name is Tongwa Akanji Aka. So she goes by Akanji a lot of time, but Tongwa Aka is kind of like a bunch of her social media. So
Ah,
either
okay.
way, yeah.
So I'm gonna go with Tongwa because that's kind of easier for me, and like, it has a nice connotation to it. So Tongwa, you guys were talking about episode 106. and you say there was something special going on and you're going for 106. Yes, yes, I got you. Yes, yes, I forgot that. Now, when I went to look at 106,
Yeah.
it was very risky. It was a story about Jasmine Shojai, and she was a playmate. Did you realize what you had said and what you did?
That must be the weirdest coincidence in the history of podcasts. I don't know. Like we just had these running jokes, like me and Tonga, right? Like it first started off with her age, right? Because at the
Right.
time, like we're recording video, it was just audio. So I was making people believe that Tonga was in her 60s, the first 4 or 5 episodes. So it was supposed to be this running joke that would keep people coming back to the podcast just to guess, to try and figure out how old she is. But she broke character one time and actually revealed her age. So episode 106 were it was one of those running jokes. We're just saying that hey, something big is gonna happen in episode 106. We're trying to get people to stay with us till episode 106, even though we didn't even know if we're gonna survive as a podcast till episode 106. So 106 must be like 2 years later because I produce 51 episodes a year. So 106 is like 2+ years later. And it just so happened that I reached out to this Playboy playmate from Australia, and yeah, we had an interesting conversation. So that was just a coincidence.
I didn't go into it. I'm going to go into it later. But
Okay,
I was curious when you said 106, and I was like, what is happening on 106?
exactly. You see, we got you.
Yeah, you did. You did. You did.
Those are just some of the little tricks we use as podcasters, right? Being candid.
And that was a good one. Um, Episode 100.
Mm.
How did you feel when you got to that episode 100? Please tell those podcasters who are starting today, they feel that, oh, I only have 4 podcasts in my list and I'm yearning for more, and I don't know, I see people getting to 100. What was the feel for number 100?
How did I feel to get to episode 100? Episode. I think episode 50 was more memorable, to be honest, because that was like the first big number. Like at the point where I got to 100, it was just like, eh. And then 150 was also kind of like memorable because it was like 3 years, 150. So 50 was like more memorable because, like, wow, I can't believe like I stuck. Because you have to realize I was in an MBA program
Right.
for those first 50 episodes, right? I was in an MBA program. For those who have a business degree, a graduate business degree, you know how tasking that can get. I had a campus job. I had a job outside of campus. Plus, I was an immigrant trying to navigate my first year and a half in a new country. So there were all these things happening at once. And for me to consistently like put out episode in within that 50 episode, I had traveled to multiple places. I had recorded an episode in Australia. I think I had recorded an episode in Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. But I just done many things. I'll finish my assignment, my homework at night, and like go to recording the podcast and do all this. And those first 50 episodes were mostly live interviews, right? So not until closer to the pandemic, like episode 70 something, that's when I started using virtual interviews because the pandemic happened, right? Those first 50 episodes was me reaching out to people, booking a physical event, either, the school library in American University or the DC Public Library or like a School of Communication studio or something. So getting to 50, I would say was more memorable. I was ecstatic that I could even achieve that. So
Well, because live interviews are really interesting, I must say, because those are where somebody's sitting right next to you and you're talking about it. Most people actually started before the pandemic, so now they have to adjust to meeting people live. I am doing the same thing. I have the equipment. Now I have to come up and do it live and talking to people, being close to people. I'm still scared of COVID, but I mean, I have to get over those fears at some point. And
yeah, it's good
COVID,
training. It teaches you to have proper time management. Like when you're trying to book a library space for 2 hours to record and you're trying to get someone there, the logistics of getting somewhere there. Sometimes you have to go drive the person or do whatever you have to do just to get it recorded. So,
wow, those are some good gems now you're giving us here. Now, as an African podcaster, what are your challenges? Give me a few of your challenges that you have when you try and bring out your podcast, because you're talking about culture,
hmm
and I noticed you take cultures of all over the world,
hmm
not particularly based in Africa. you're trying to mix the whole world together. No, what's the agenda here?
hmm It's just me being curious, man. I like to say like the objective of the podcast is selfishly mine. To be honest, like these were honestly conversations I was having in my personal life. So I'll have friends who are from Uruguay or from DC or whatever, or even within Nigeria, like friends from different parts of Nigeria, north, south, east, and west. And I'll just be interested asking them that, hey, oh, I noticed that okay, I lived in an area where there was this wire that crossed the street lamps or in the area. I didn't know it was called an Eruv. I was talking to my Jewish friend. I was like, what is this? And he was like, oh, it's an Eruv. This is what it symbolizes. And then, I got to know about Diwali from my friend who's Indian, and different things like that. So it's me just being curious, but I just happen to be doing so in an interview. So it's not like I like to say it's a very casual conversation by me being curious and just being interested and having that casual conversation. So it's not like documentary form. I say, okay, today we're going to talk about Kenya. Kenya was formed in 1952. Nope. Me just being generally curious. And learning about other cultures in a very conversational way without direct questions. It's me talking to another individual, but you can learn things from each interview. That's kind of like what I'll say the objective is. Yeah.
What has been your hardest podcast? Because I know there's one podcast that you were trying to prepare and you couldn't figure out what you're gonna say, and how did it end up being? Was it
My
easier
hardest
or was it?
episode. I mean, there's been several. You're a podcaster yourself, so I'm sure there are challenges every day. I mean, there's been situations where I'd had to have recorded and prepared and did everything, and all of a sudden, an hour after the interview, they're sending me an email saying, "Hey, I don't want that interview, up." So you have
What?
to. Yeah, I've had that. I have episodes I haven't put out before, either by request or some other thing. So there's that. There are situations where chasing a particular guest. I've chased a guest for almost 2 years before to get on the podcast, sending email every 4 or 5 weeks for like 2 years trying to get them on the podcast DM. So there's
And what
that
happened?
challenge. Yeah, they eventually came on. Yeah, so there's that challenge as well. Obviously, logistical issues like editing, just having lost audios, like you thought it was stored on your computer, and you go there, your computer crashes or something, like the audio was lost, or people kind of like using your podcast. It was interesting because I'm always very open, right? Like even where I used to work and everything, like they knew I had a podcast, like they knew about stuff. And sometimes people would just come up and say, hey, they'll make some type of remark based on an episode you did. And I was like, wow, if this could happen for a very, nerdy podcast like Culture Class, I wonder what people go through who have like sex podcasts and like talk a whole bunch of crazy shit. Like if that gets out there, they'll probably have like a lot of backlash or whatnot. But yeah, just stuff, challenges here and there. To pick one, I don't know if I can really pinpoint one. Of course, I've tried to hold an event or two in the past which failed. I've tried to produce a scripted series podcast as well during the pandemic, which failed. I mean, we produced 2 episodes, which I still have. We didn't put it out, but that was like a great team of like 4 or 5 people working on that. About a friend of mine whose dad was kidnapped in Guatemala. Like it was so painful to watch that go after all the money and time we put into that. But yeah, just stuff like that, man. Like you always have challenges with
And
in
what
podcasting.
and what has been the easiest podcast that you've ever had, that you've had fun in the podcast, that after you're done, you're like, man, this is it.
Oh man, the easiest episode, probably one I didn't need to prepare for. I would say
Like this one.
Wait, this one, yeah, this one is one. I mean, because when you start to interview people, you want to be respectful of their culture. You want to ask them some certain things about your cultural history and things. So you need to do a little bit of research. So that can be tasking in itself. But me talking to someone like LD is a retired Nigerian musician. He was one of the pioneers of Afro beats that Davido and Wizkid are enjoying now. He lives in Atlanta now. So that
Wow.
was pretty interesting because he was my idol growing up. Like we used to write, like listen to his songs and pause the tapes and write his lyrics on the notebook and then like rap them back to each other, like my brother and I, like tribesmen. So that was pretty interesting. That's one. I'd say came very naturally, and it just kept going on because I think I ended up putting almost 3 hours worth of content, or maybe I split it in two. I can't even remember. But
It is easier actually. You know, your idols. I'll be honest with you. I'm gonna jump in on this one. I
uh,
did one with mushrooms, and these were my childhood idols. And
sorry,
I can tell you,
who are they called? Mushrooms?
mushrooms.
Okay,
I did with two of the three remaining of that group,
nice.
and I had a good time. I was sitting there, and this was a live interview, actually, one of the few live interviews I've done, and I was really enjoying myself. And I was starstruck in the beginning because these were people I used to see when I was young, and I was like, "Wow!" Then I'm sitting here with him, and he's like, "Hey, you doing good? Yeah, let's go on. You know, what do you think about this? What do you think
Right.
about that?" It just went, it flowed. It really flowed well. Okay, okay,
Exactly. So
and
I'm sure there are many more I'm missing because, to be honest, like I'm just like a musician. You know how Lil Wayne sometimes forgets his own lyrics? Like I forget some episodes I put out. Sometimes I just get tweeted out from like episode 42 or something, or someone comments on episode 36. I'm like, oh, I even forgot about that. It's been a lot. So like for musicians who's put out like 10 albums and counting, like shout out to them. Like this shit ain't easy. Like,
right,
Yeah.
right. And are you feeling like you're on cruise control right now? Like you know what's going on
No.
before? Yeah,
No, because that's the thing. It's never cruise control because you have to keep reinventing yourself. And to be honest, I think I can do better at reinventing myself. Because if it's just cruise control, then it'll get boring, then it'll get static. I listen to a lot of podcasters myself, and the podcasters I follow, like Brilliant Idiots, the Joe Rogan Experience, Flagrant 2, from Lagos We Love, like those guys reinvent yourself. If you listen to Brilliant Idiots 8 years ago, sorry, what was that?
I said I love that one, from Lagos with Love.
Exactly. Like if you listen to them like 6 years ago, whatever, like it's a different format. So like you have to keep reinventing yourself. Like, okay, we started with just audio. I know I've been promising my guests video for ages. I promise you guys I have all the Zoom recordings. I just haven't put them out, but I reinvented the brand, the logo and everything. I reinvented the format of how, I conducted the interviews, reinvented the marketing, the way I put them out. Now Tongwa is back. And then I was trying to reinvent with the scripted podcast thing, but that didn't make it. And now I'm trying to reinvent with PodBreak and a live event and a live show. So like you can't just be on cruise control. If you're on cruise control for a year, at December, at the end of the year, you have to think, okay, next year, what am I going to do to like take it up to the next level, right? To make it
Right,
better for the listeners.
right, right. You certainly true. You're certainly true about that. You can never be on cruise control. And I like the fact that you said you're always experimenting, trying something new, and moving on to something that's really out there, because you cannot remain the same. Everything comes, and everything has a season, and you get to meet other podcasters, and then say, okay, what can I do to better my podcast? And that's a good thing. um
Yep.
does any podcaster give me about two podcasters that you like?
To podcasters, not podcasts, right? Podcasters, the people within the
Yes,
podcast, right?
episode podcast, not me. Don't include me.
Yeah.
My
I mean, there's this Nigerian podcast, man. I've been begging him forever. I'd love to produce a few episodes for him. His name is Andre Blaze, and he used to have this podcast called My Africa Podcast. He was super early, man, super early. I think his podcast probably stopped in like 2018, and he had like maybe like 60 or 70 episodes then. So he probably started like 2015 or 16 or something. And the way this dude interviews, man, it was just ridiculous. Like he was such a master at what he does. I DM'd him a few times. A media company in Nigeria acquired his podcast, and then it was kind of like an aqua hire. And then, I was like, man, why didn't you leave this thing as your baby, man? But it is what it is. So Andre Blaze is one person. That's as far as the interviews go. I want to put someone there as far as the scripted thing goes. I would say, mm, maybe say this. Not. I would say Chris. Oh, I forget his last name, but Chris has something called the Loudspeakers Network based out of New York. The Loudspeakers Network houses podcasts such as Brilliant Idiots, The Read with Crystal, a whole bunch of podcasts. It was founded by Chris and Comeback Jack a few years ago. Just his production and his management skills for a podcast network, like he had some of the biggest podcasts in the game. This was pre Wondery and pre all these people. Like they had started a long time ago. And just he's not on the mic as a host, but just what he does behind the scenes. Um, I admire him as well.
Okay. And do you listen? How many podcasts do you listen to in a week?
Uh, man, I mean, I have my regular. Let me actually get out my phone. I have my regular hitters. Let me open Google. I find myself on Google Podcasts more these days than Spotify or Apple, even though I use an
Uh-huh.
Android. All right, so mostly business podcasts because I started a company a year ago. So I'll just read you the first 12 podcasts on my list. So I have Acquired,
Mm-hmm.
with Ben Gilbert and David Rosenthal. I have The Daily. I have Below the Line with Josh Bashara. I Said What I Said podcast, which is a Nigerian podcast with Jaws and FK Abudu. Victory, the podcast, which is a podcast about Entourage, the show, hosted by Doug Ellen and Kevin Dillon. I have Freightweight podcast, which is a trucking podcast. I have Pod News, of course. I have My First Million, Truck and Hustle Business, How I Built This, 234 Essential Business, Black Tech Business, Sweaty Startup Business, Master of Skill Business, Everyone Hates Marketers Business, Sambaza, Freight Coach Business, The Way I See It, Shit They Don't Teach You in School, Africalypso Podcast, Wisdom from the Top, and a bunch of other podcasts out there. So it changes. So this is my theme for now. It's mostly business podcasts. But if you had asked me this question like 6 months ago, it would have probably been scripted podcasts. If you had asked me like a year ago, it would have probably been sex podcasts. Like it tends to change every other 6 months. So
I noticed that. All right. To finish up, we're gonna do a quick. I like to do devilish dilemmas. You guys, if you can see that devilish dilemmas, that's a new
devilish
one.
dilemmas. Damn,
Right.
I haven't heard of that
You gotta
before.
answer which one you're gonna choose.
Okay.
At random, I'm gonna do three.
Mm-hmm.
Which one would you choose? To weigh 280 pounds but be happy, or to have a perfect figure and be miserable?
Be happy, of course. That's an easy one. Christ.
And be 280 pounds?
Who wants to be miserable? Like, so you have the body of a goddess or a god, and what? So you're there, you're miserable, but you're living for other people, so other people admire you, but you're internally miserable. I want to be happy, man. I can weigh 500 pounds and be happy. I'm good.
Sneezing. Which one would you choose? Sneezing every 5 minutes or having to go to the bathroom every half an hour?
Sneezing every five. So you need to explain what type of sneezing. Like, is it just dry sneeze, like a chew, or it's like that sneeze that like, oh, it's a little bit, oh, you need to wipe down because a bit of phlegm, a bit of COVID-19 and all that stuff.
It's open to interpretation. Interpretation.
Going to the bathroom, is that number one or number two?
Again, open to interpretation.
If you're open to interpretation, I'm gonna choose the extreme of the bathroom and say, okay, I'm constipating every 30 minutes and I'm having a light sneeze every 5 minutes. In that case, I'll have a light sneeze every 5 minutes.
All right. Which one would you choose? This is the last one. To be the tallest person in the world or to be the shortest person in the world?
The tallest person in the world. Who was the tallest person in the world? I think he was almost 8 feet, right? I think it was a dude. And who's the shortest person in the world? Like, can I do some Googles real quick?
No.
No, I just want to know the height to know that, okay, 4'5" versus 8'11" or something. Or you know what? No need. I won't do Googles.
Open. Rapid fire is open. So
Okay,
you gotta
rapid
be
fire.
right.
Let me see. Who can make more money, the shortest or tallest? I want to argue the tallest because I can maybe be in the NBA. I might not be good, but at least I can make a team. The shortest person, what can they do to make money? beside maybe being kind of like an actor, or maybe they're incredibly smart. I guess either of them can be incredibly smart. But I guess the tallest person will probably die quicker than the shortest person,
Okay.
because taller people that are that tall tend to die a lot. They live to like their 30s or their 20s.
All right.
Fuck it, man. I'll say the tallest, because I can probably maybe make some money if I play my cards right. Maybe create some legacy in the 30 years of my life, and you know,
There you go.
keep it moving.
All right. So that concludes our show. This is the first episode of many to come, where I interview podcasters. And today we had Nosa Iyare, and who is in the culture culture class podcast. This podcast is over 150 episodes. I think the last time I checked, it's
Over at
160.
160 now. I'm closer to 170 or something.
I think it's 178 now.
Uh,
And what he's done is he's moved with the host, gone solo, gone back with the host. And this is what I tell you, podcasters: listen to his, like I did, went to listen to his first two episodes, then hit the middle of the episodes, and then hit what he has currently right now. So you get to learn a lot more on podcasting. Now, check him out. And also, don't forget to check out the show notes, because that's where you're going to find out about the Podbreakers. And if you're going to be in Chicago the July 4th weekend, you will be able to meet all these diverse podcasters who are hanging out together, and we're going to have a good time, and we'd like to meet you and see, kind of, this is the only time you actually get to see your podcasters live, that you can touch them. Remember, it's past pandemic, or whatever it is, we'll say it's past pandemic, but the pandemic is still there. We'll be careful, but the whole thing is, you get to see us, we get to hang out, we get to talk, chat, eat, do all that is going to be done in the summertime. Remember, summertime is a good time. And with that, we're going to say kwaheri, which means goodbye. And from Sambaza Podcast to the Wasambazaji and the Culture Class Podcast, have a good evening.
all
Goodbye.
right. Thanks for having me. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.